We respect life. Therefore, torture is the way to go.
He hasn't changed. This isn't a thing where it's a gotcha, where like, well, I mean, I can't prove he's bad now, but he was. No. People are dying as a result of his baked-in desire for fascism and hatred for diversity. Stephen Miller, in addition to being, like a strategist for the regime, is also an ideologue and a deeply weak person. Like if a person that had grown up with me was left with these feelings about me, it would haunt me. Old footage of Donald Trump's worst advisor, Stephen Miller, has now resurfaced, and it turns out that as bad as he is now, he's always been basically that bad. Take a look.
To the issue of the Iraqi civilians, I think that as many of them should survive as possible, because the goal of any military conflict is to kill as few people as possible. But as for Saddam Hussein and his henchmen, I think the ideal solution would be to cut off their fingers. I don't think it's necessary to kill them entirely. We're not a barbaric people. We respect life. Therefore, torture is the way to go. Because torture people can live. Torture is a celebration of life and human dignity. We need to remember that as we enter these very dark and dangerous times in the next century. And I only hope that many of my peers and people who will be leading this country will appreciate the value and respect that torture shows towards other cultures.
Okay, so that video is from 2003, and despite no visual evidence to back this up, he is only 17 years old there. He looks a year younger than he does right now. He has more hair. I'll give him that.
What are you wearing?
I didn't even notice the clothing.
He was wearing like a business button down on a school bus.
Yeah, because he's a goober.
He's
a sociopath goober. That's what he is and always has been. We'll return to the clothing, but here's the thing. If you just found a random video of a person who in 2025 is cool, where they're joking about torture in the first year of a big war or whatever, when he's only 17 and people are laughing, I'd be like, yeah, kids suck and they don't really think about what they're saying. Whatever. So he's talking about fingers and he's talking about torture and all that. The issue is, it's not a thing that was true of him when he was 17 and now he's totally different. When he was 17, he was pining for more torture. And now that he's 39, he's giving us more torture. He hasn't changed. This isn't a thing where it's a gotcha, where like, well, I mean, I can't prove he's bad now, but he was. No. People are dying as a result of his baked-in desire for fascism and hatred for diversity. And it also turns out that has been the culmination of a lifelong desire for those things. And let's just briefly mention, it seems even more ridiculous that journalist Terry, I believe it's Moran, is it Moran? Moran, was fired for tweeting that he's a world-class hater or whatever. When evidently he's been kind of a world-class hater his entire life. And so he put up this response to Jon Favreau saying that he's been a sociopath for most of his life, saying I wrote it because it's true, and it definitely is. But anyway, so Brett, since you've seen this video of him at 17, does this require you to update his villain origin story of when a Hispanic teenager or whatever turned him down and that led him down this dark path? What do you think?
He's just a terrible guy.
Yeah.
So here's the thing, it's a bit, right? It's obviously a bit. He's doing a bit, and the comedic premise is, how can I, a modest proposal myself into advocating for torture, right? How do I justify torture in a funny comedic way, saying it's actually good for them? That would be funny if he, ideally saying that he understands that what he's saying is ridiculous. And you would hope that he would use that power to realize how ridiculous the statements he would later make are, right? But instead, it's actually worse that it's a bit, because he's proving to us that he knows how terrible what he's saying and doing now are, and he knew that back when he was 17. It's just he's either an evil guy or an evil sociopath. The question being whether he really acknowledges how bad he's being, but it seems like he knows full well, because even when he was 17, he was telling jokes, which means you do understand the bad thing you're doing.
Yeah, no, he's just terrible. It's like now that I'm a father, I get so depressed sometimes when I think about, like, I look at my daughter and I imagine what possible life she could have, what she could become, what her personality could develop into, the interests she could have. And it just makes you think about that path and all the influences on kids and how much goes into them. You spend countless hours working to shape them. And all of what went into Stephen Miller just produced an absolute crap human. The world would objectively be better off if he had never existed in it. And I think on some level he knows that.
The Democrat Party has become a party that openly aids and encourages and foments violence. They've been radicalized by Democrat Party rhetoric that describes anyone who doesn't share their warped, twisted worldview as fascists, worthy, by implication, of execution. They are using this language to mark people, to put a target on them.
Stephen Miller appears there to be describing members of the right in media. He seems a bit confused. It was Matt Walsh that said that the mayor of Chicago should be executed. It was that Republican state legislator that is now saying Pramila Jayapal should be hung or possibly killed with a firing squad. It's lots of Republicans are calling for executions, but jokes aside, sarcasm aside, his narrative there is that the left is too encouraging of violence with their rhetoric. And because they do that, even though they don't, we see all this left-wing violence, which doesn't actually exist. It's a narrative that's convenient to the regime. But what's interesting is that since we just in recent weeks have seen multiple acts of right-wing political violence, Stephen Miller could perhaps check his own rhetoric a little bit, because coming out of this weekend, he's now being blamed for what looks like another bit of right-wing targeted political violence. See, he put out this tweet, okay? The day before an apparent arson attack on a judge's home. He said the issue before, I think that's supposed to be us now, is very simple and clear. There's a large and growing movement of left-wing terrorism in this country. That is not true, but if you wanted to terrify your base into committing acts of stochastic terrorism, you would want to spread that sort of myth. It is well organized and funded, and it is shielded by far-left Democrat judges, prosecutors, and attorneys general. The only remedy is to use legitimate state power to dismantle terrorism and terror networks. So he is lying about the terrorism and then lying that the terrorists which don't exist are being protected by judges. And so weird that we've had such an uptick in threats against judges, which we've previously reported on the damage report. It's become incredibly common for there to be death threats against judges recently. Well, now we have this fire, which happened over the weekend. Police are investigating the cause of a fire that burned down the home of South Carolina Circuit Court Judge Diane Goodstein, who had reportedly received death threats for weeks related to her work. Goodstein was reportedly not at home at the time of the fire, but at least 3 members of her family, including her husband, former Democratic State Senator Arnold Goodstein, and their son, have been hospitalized with serious injuries. So this is very, very scary. Now there's a lot that we don't know about the fire just yet, but it is convenient considering that in just the past couple of weeks, that particular judge had been receiving these death threats after blocking the state election commission from releasing its voter files to the DOJ. So basically, the DOJ is trying to get all of these like special files from different states that would allow them to look into how elections are run on the state level, perhaps start to influence it in the future. And in this particular case, the judge was like access to that information, and the right had freaked out about that. And so we talk about them putting targets on the backs of these judges. They love to do this. Donald Trump constantly tweets about the AGs, about the judges. This was one of those. And in the wake of people pointing out that he had been encouraging radicalization against judges, in this particular case, you can put up this tweet by Representative Dan Goldman, talks about the targeting of these judges. Stephen Miller freaks out about it, calls the person vile, deeply warped, and then says that no, they're actually the ones that are fighting political violence. Meanwhile, Dan Goldman tries to get him. He didn't answer right there a question about whether Stephen Miller actually will stand against political violence on all sides and not just the fictional left-wing political violence that Stephen Miller is pushing to help the regime. Dan Goldman sends him a second tweet: will you condemn all political violence or only that against your supporters? Which is the easiest thing to do in the world. You could do that and then go right back to spinning your fascist PR narratives. But he doesn't even respond to that. Because Stephen Miller, in addition to being like a strategist for the regime, is also an ideologue and a deeply weak person. And so he can't even bring himself to pretend to have an issue with right-wing political violence. And so we're waiting for more information about this particular fire, but I know there's a lot of judges that are already incredibly terrified of what the MAGA movement might do to them. And I imagine those fears are even stronger coming out of this weekend. Jared, what do you think?
Well, while he was fighting with Dan Goldman back and forth there about that, he then went on to also have more vitriolic statements to say about the judge that ruled against them sending troops to any state that they want, specifically in this case, Oregon. So he didn't miss a beat. As he's not answering the question about or not caring about this, seems to be arson attack from folks who are mad at this judge for her ruling. He did the same thing to someone else while he's calling other folks vile. He's like, when I want to call him a cartoon character, I don't want people to take that as like, a jokingly thing. The guy, every time someone mentions anything, it's vile, crazy, stupid, can't believe, killing. Like he's over the top. Like really, like he should be like, we should like study his brain and try and figure out how he got to this point where he's this rabid. Enough people are weak enough to listen to him rail like this and snarl every time and call other folks terrorist judges that somehow are supporting terrorist networks. With all these terrorists in the streets who are demanding things like access to healthcare, and freedom and normal things like voting rights. Those are terroristic things from fascists. If normal freedom things are terroristic things to these guys, it means that they're against those things. I'm not sure why the guy who said, anybody that's Antifa, anti-fascist is against me, people haven't finished that equation. Yeah. He's calling himself a fascist.
Someone's probably gonna need to do like a bit of a wellness check on Stephen Miller because everywhere he turns, another family member of his is ripping him a new one on social media. The first we're gonna turn to, and the longest, is his cousin, Elisa Casmer, who apparently grew up with him and wrote kind of like a tell-all book on social media. If you take a look here, about her experiences with him, her criticisms of him. We're only gonna read a couple excerpts, but it is, like if a person that had grown up with me was left with these feelings about me, it would haunt me. We'll see if it haunts him. She says, in part, a society is only as strong as its most vulnerable, and ours are at our weakest. This is not by accident, but by design. Your design, Stephen, targeting hardworking, vibrant community members who are being terrorized for simply being brown. This was never about criminals or illegal entry. And now with the passing of this bloated, grotesque bill stuffed with more funding for ICE than most countries spend on their entire military, I'm left speechless. Where does this hateful obsession end? What are you trying to build besides fear? Immigrants were a part of your upbringing. Is this cruelty your way of rejecting a part of yourself? People always ask me, what happened to you? I don't have a clear answer. I can only surmise it was a perfect storm of ego, fear, hate, and ambition. All of it mangled into something cruel and hollow, masquerading as strength. And here's where it hurts even more. We were raised Jewish. We celebrated holidays each year with the reminder to stand up and say never again. But what you were doing breaks that sacred promise. It breaks everything we were taught. How can you do to others what has been done to us? How can you wake up each day and repeat the cruelty that our people barely escaped from? You've destroyed so many lives just to feed your own obsession and ego and uphold an administration so corrupt, so vile, I can barely comprehend it. As surreal as it all feels, this is reality. As much as I try to disassociate from it, the truth remains. Being this close to such deep cruelty fills me with shame. I am gutted. My heart breaks that this is the legacy you have brought to our family, a legacy I never asked to share with you, and one I now carry like a curse. So that's his cousin. It's very well said. Damn. His uncle, David Glosser, you can see a post that had been put up, obviously attacking Donald Trump. And a woman, Heather Mull, writes this comment about the cruelty and glee that she sees in the administration and says to him, I'm sorry you're stuck being related to Stephen Miller because he's a depraved fiend, to which Stephen Miller's uncle, David Glosser, says, agreed, cruelty is and always has been the point. And there have been other instances in America where family members of a person have come out to try to warn America about this person, about how broken they are, how terrible they are. It unfortunately doesn't generally work. People don't listen, and I wish that they would. like relatives of RFK Jr. tried to tell the American people who he was and what he would do, and what do you know, they turned out to be right. But that was just a stunning takedown. Maz, obviously, I don't think you've ever had to experience that from your family, but it's rough being related to someone so grotesque.
Yeah, people always ask. They go like, "I wonder what tipped Hitler over to becoming Hitler? Like, what was his childhood like?" Or you go back and you reflect these people's childhood. What led them to where they are? And to your point, if you listen to the relatives and the people that grew up with them, you find out a lot of information. And the thing about Stephen Miller, there's even videos of him at a younger age just talking very racisty. And I know that, for example, I believe he was, I think in high school, he said something along the lines of like, we should just throw our trash and let the janitors pick it up because that's what they're supposed to do. I mean, that's the kind of person this guy is. And so when you have relatives telling you things like that, or when you have Donald Trump's mother in the documentary saying when Donald was young, he borrowed a toy from his brother and he wouldn't give it back. I just remember him not giving back the toy. When you hear relatives tell you those things from a young age, these people are damaged and they are mean, and to the cruelty is the point, as his uncle said. And so, why are we surprised? And why don't people listen? Why don't people listen to those that are close to these people?
Yeah, in the chat, we'll end on this. People bring up great examples. Paul Gosar is the one I was referencing, where like 8 members of his family were in political ads against him. Like everybody has one person in their family that doesn't like them, but like that's a whole cookout coming out against you. And of course, Pete Hegseth also had, now this wasn't a public thing, but his mother had sent him that letter about his history of abusing women. Like, there's people who've tried to warn us in a variety of ways, and I do wish we would listen.
Under President Trump's leadership, we are looking to set a goal of a minimum of 3,000 arrests for ICE every day, and President Trump is going to keep pushing to get that number up higher each and every single day so we can get all of the Biden illegals that were flooded into our country for 4 years out of our country.
Okay, so bare minimum 3,000 per day, and Trump is gonna be pushing for higher and higher. 3, that's nothing. We gotta get these Biden illegals that are flooding. Again, like he's a racist little goblin, okay? It doesn't take extra effort for him to dehumanize people, but it's important for you never to think of these as people, certainly never to think of them as the innocent people they are, many of whom have their documentation totally in order. No. They're Biden illegals, the worst of the worst, some other slogan that will make you comfortable with the disgusting policy that's being pursued. And it is disgusting, but let's be clear, the numbers are not working out the way he said. The math is not mathing. They're not meeting 3,000. In fact, they're deporting fewer people than they were, and there's a number of good reasons for that. And so it is sort of good news, I suppose, but they're certainly not going to admit that. Now, they're pretending that Stephen Miller never said what he said, what you just saw him say. So this is according to a Justice Department attorney, said, DHS has confirmed that neither ICE leadership nor its field offices have been directed to meet any numerical quota or target for arrests, okay? And one of the reasons that a Justice Department attorney might wanna say that to the Court of Appeals is, if you are pretending that there is an emergency that demands mass deportation, and then you just come up with a quota, it doesn't really seem like there's an emergency. It seems like, no, we want to hit these numbers or whatever. It's not like we have to do whatever we can under difficult circumstances in an emergency. It seems like, nah, I just want to get them or whatever. But again, they're having a lot of trouble with that. DOJ attorney Yakov Roth attributed the quota claim to anonymous reports in the newspapers, which I guess is the video we just showed you. That was an anonymous report on a newspaper. But anyway, yeah, no, they've all said that it's gonna be 3,000. In fact, Tom Homan was quoted by libs of TikTok, hardly a newspaper, saying that 3,000 per day, deportations per day is not enough. We have to arrest 7,000 every day. 1 billion migrants a day is what we need. They're just competing with each other to seem more xenophobic. It's a fun little game for them, but they're not actually able to do that. And you might wonder why that is. Well, there's a couple reasons. So first of all, Their policy has been wildly unpopular, okay? Donald Trump on his marquee issue, I mean, I know that he's underwater on every policy, but even on immigration, that's the thing where the American people who have been trained for decades to despise people that are different than them, and unfortunately too many do that, but they have been trained to do that, they might be inclined to support Donald Trump. And still, they seem to be in favor of some sort of harsher immigration policy than we already have, but they don't like the one they're seeing from Donald Trump. They in particular do not like the constant reminders that the people that are being deported are not the worst of the worst. They're in fact innocent. And then they see things like Kilmar Abrego Garcia, where what's being done, you can't even see justice from the position the Trump administration is sitting in. They don't like those sorts of stories being so closely tied to America and its reputation around the world. That the gay barber that Fox was so dismissive of, who's now revealing that he was repeatedly sexually assaulted after being deported. All of this makes rational, compassionate Americans sick to their stomach. So that's one reason. They especially, by the way, they don't like seeing soldiers on horseback rampaging through parks as kids try to play. All of this is wildly unpopular. And so that's one reason they've had to scale it back. These clashes between the people of cities and masked, anonymous, unaccountable ICE trying to battle them, that's also not popular for the administration. So that's kind of hurting them. But besides that, I would also say one reason is there's not 3,000 deserving migrants to be rounded up on a daily basis. There certainly isn't more and more. There certainly isn't 7,000. It just was never based on anything, these claims that America has in fact been flooded and is up to its neck in migrants that are breaking the law. We said before the election, that was a lie. It was a knowing lie. It was just a thing they campaigned on. And then they caught up to the car they were chasing, and now they have to deliver. But the thing is, there are not 3,000 cannibals. There are not 3,000 killers. There are not 3,000 rapists or anything like that. America is not actually plagued by this sort of crime, whether by migrants or by native-born Americans. We just are not that violent and crime-ridden a country, despite what Fox and Donald Trump would have you believe. And so that, I think, is the single biggest reason that they're having trouble with this. Now, there is one additional one. It is that every day they go back and forth between, we got to get rid of everybody a shade darker than like Colin Quinn or whatever, to, oh, actually, a lot of these people work for like corporations that are donors run, like in hospitality and the farm industry and all that and construction. So maybe we shouldn't actually round them up, but then Stephen Miller will come in and be like, oh, one of them stole my girlfriend in high school. And then they'll start rounding people up again. And then the donors push back. And so switching back and forth between that doesn't make it easy to have a nationwide immigration policy. And so I think that's also causing problems for them. In any event, I think it is good news that they're not reaching these numbers. It is good news to know that we live in a country that is not plagued by this sort of terror that they would have you believe. All of that is good. The issue is they are still out there in the streets. They are still being funded to the tune of like over $100 billion. They have that money. And if they're not spending that money rounding up undocumented migrants, what are they going to be spending that money on? I think that's a very important question going forward. When you give to ICE and Border Patrol more funding than, again, as I always say, most of the world's militaries, they're gonna spend it on something. Okay, and the lies that were used to justify the funding aren't a good use for the money. So again, what are they gonna use it for? What are these people that are effectively going to be a sort of hand-picked, hastily thrown together group of the most devoted like Trump fans that have been given unlimited funding? What are they going to be doing day to day? I don't like any of the potential answers to that question, but we're gonna find out. We're gonna have to see if two wrongs actually make a right in regards to that guy, Gavin Newsom, because he got into it with Stephen Miller over the weekend, where Stephen Miller was responding to the fact that a judge had provided some limitations on ICE's crusade against LA. And if you've been watching recently, you probably know they're sending like the cavalry to MacArthur Park, and they're, I guess in Town Hall, they're filling up the basement with tons of people and just leaving them there. And so ICE has been running amok. They've invaded LA effectively. And so a judge wanted to provide a little bit of pushback against that. So Stephen Miller's complaining about it, calling it a communist judge. I don't know what any of this has to do with communism, but he likes his buzzwords. It makes him feel a little bit safer in a world that scares him. So Governor Newsom's press office Twitter puts out this tweet in reply. This fascist cuck in DC continues his assault on democracy and the Constitution and his attempt to replace the sovereignty of the people with autocracy. Sorry the Constitution hurt your feelings, Stephen, cry harder. And so I really only have one thought, which is that after this, I now support Gavin Newsom for president. I'm kidding, I don't actually. But so this is a test of, do people want Democrats to just do a Trump? Just do the thing that all of the right wingers do. Say the cry harder, call them a fascist cuck or whichever, which in defense of Gavin Newsom, Stephen Miller is a fascist and has been alleged to be a cuck thanks to Elon Musk. So it's not like he just randomly threw that out there the way they would. There's a case to be made for Stephen Miller to be a fascist cuck. So anyway, just something to think about. But what do you think about this strategy, JR?
It's in the right forms. Like, it doesn't have to become your normal messaging policy. Again, the way that MAGA has become. Donald Trump literally said, I called people the best names. And I think that's part of my success is name calling. But his name calling is based in nothing. His name calling is based in his anger and his hatred towards people. So this is based in Stephen Miller being a fascist. Stephen Miller complaining about judges and rulings and the justice system working in ways that he doesn't like, after he then said everything will be great as far as everything I want to do as far as dismantling democracy, as long as the judges cooperate. So he is a fascist. It's just what he is. He's telling us that. Like, that's undeniable. So you can use it in these situations. I think it would get tiring if that then replaces actual normal conversation, evidence, maybe even some indications of things that you want to do once you maybe have positions of power as a Democrat. So it's not just led in name calling, which, as we see, if that's all you've got, like this administration does, once they're in power, all they've got after that is more name calling and destruction. So, it'll show an emptiness if that's the direction that they go.
I need your help and everyone in the chat to adjudicate one more question, okay? But first, I'm going to say here, when there was pushback against this, but the governor calling him a fascist cuck, they said in his the director of communications said the office had drawn from Trump's own vocabulary. We were inspired by the White House's use of the term, which is a nice bit of trolling or whatever. By the way, apparently, Musk has unfollowed Katie Miller, which is just like, he's such an immature person. Like, she quits her job and like maybe they had a disagreement or she stopped working there or whatever. I don't care about that. It's that he then unfollows her. I'm gonna unfollow you. Like he's a little baby boy. He's an infantino, basically, is what he is. But anyway, so let's talk about Gavin Newsom, because Gavin Newsom did the fascist cuck thing. He referred to them as the real scum because Trump calls me new scum if we put up graphic 2. So he's doing that. He's defending migrants. Okay, that's good. In number 3, he responds to libs of TikTok. He says, I condemn any assault on law enforcement, you S poster, now due January 6th. So he's mixing it up. He's getting more aggressive. And I am old enough to remember when, coming out of the last election, what Gavin Newsom did was he started bringing on people like Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon onto his podcast, and they were talking about all the stuff they agree on, which seemed to me, as an outsider, like a strategy. Like, oh, we need to turn against all that lib stuff. And he was like agreeing with them on stuff having to do with transgender people. And he's like, oh, let's all come together and like. And now, I don't think he's doing that. I'll check his podcast or whatever. Now it feels like, oh, people want someone who's gonna punch them in the face as hard as they can, which is what people want. And so I don't know if you agree that there's been that shift, JR, but if you do we give him credit for listening to what people want? Or is this just another example of him being a slimy politician who will take whatever position he thinks he needs to become president?
Yeah, well, at least until we get folks who actually genuinely want to represent the people that voted them in, you got to go with what he's going to give you, because at least it's actionable. At least maybe it's getting somewhere. Maybe it'll lead to some kind of policy changes. Because if he got his ear for things as far as just language changes or the way that he's going to talk about certain things and approach it and have to now have a stance on it, it's setting them up to either violate those things later if it doesn't come into actionable policies, which then, get your ass kicked all over the place for that, or you go ahead and follow through and do it. But it's like a transition period. No one, but I don't think Gavin Newsom is gonna be this like big Democratic lib figure that's gonna be the best ever. But if there's a bridge to get folks that'll be influenced to start doing things in a way that makes sense, because the majority of people are telling you this is the way it's supposed to be, I'll take it temporarily.
Yeah, I will. I'm really worried. And he's literally in South Carolina now, like giving speeches and stuff. He says he's there for the midterms. Yeah, you care a lot about the midterms in South Carolina. My fear is that rather than like turning himself into a policy progressive to get ready for the primary in 2028, he's gonna be the strongest anti-Trumper, and that some people might find that more appealing, considering all that's crazy. Because like he gets in Trump's face and he attacks the cucks or whatever. But like, that's good, I want that, but that's not what we need in a president. Once Trump is done, we need someone who's gonna actually push for and get through progressive policies, and we'll see. But so far that doesn't seem like Gavin Newsom. So I'm a little bit worried about this being a strategy to sort of like, it's a shortcut to get around having to actually change on policies.
True, but you know what? That'll make for a good primary if there's real folks in it that want to say things and he has to be a part of it. That's what a primary is good for.
Anyway, look, it could come down to AOC and him. I'm just saying.
He says that you're attempting to inflame tensions and create a war zone. He also says that you are profiling, that you're targeting black and brown people, even those who turn out to be here legally. What's your response?
Well, first of all, the black people in Chicago are thrilled that we're getting the illegal aliens out of their communities who are stealing their housing, jobs, and resources.
Okay, number one, Stephen Miller, we don't need you to talk for the blacks anywhere, Chicago or anywhere. You are not the spokesperson for the blacks. Let's start there. Black people in Chicago really don't need Stephen Miller to be their voice. No secret, Stephen Miller is the real leader of Trump's immigration policy. However, the Justice Department is trying to hide that, and a judge wasn't having it. Government lawyer Sarmad Khojaset stumbled through objections to a demand from plaintiffs to hand over details of communications between Miller and Border Patrol Commander Gregory Bovino. The argument came during Bovino's deposition as part of a lawsuit about immigration agents' aggressive tactics during the Trump administration's Operation Midway Blitz in Chicago, prompting an intervention from US District Judge Sarah Ellis. Now, during the testy exchange, Khojaset repeatedly cut across the bench and even continually misnamed the Operation Midway Drift. He also had to apologize for being new to the case. He complained to Ellis that he had prepped Bovino for a narrow set of issues, saying, they asked today about communications with Stephen Miller. They asked today about body cam footage from the Los Angeles immigration operation. I feel sandbagged right now. Ellis responded that such lines were relevant if they illuminated what Bovino told officers and how they had shaped forced decisions on the streets of Chicago. See, the judge is not going to let you off the hook with that. Judges are going to go for that. And if you're a lawyer worth anything, okay, here you are representing the administration, you can't answer these simple questions. They're not prepped because there's a lot of lies and illegalities going around. This is the problem when we've got a revolving door of attorneys and they haven't been here for the entire thing, Ellis told Khojaset. They haven't sat through people's testimony. They haven't sat through these hearings. And so now I'm having to explain myself multiple times. And I find it, at this point, extremely frustrating and a waste of time. I can tell you, as someone who's been in court frequently, I didn't belong in court. You want to sue? He keeps losing each time. But hey, listen, our daughter's great. Okay. Here's what I can tell you. Judges who get frustrated, it's not good for you. It's not good for you at all. Just go ahead and tell the truth. But if you're being evasive and you keep doing all these things like changing lawyers and such, it's not going to go well for you. Judges get frustrated. And when they say you're wasting my time, that's the hammer right there. The Obama appointed judge added, If you interrupt me one more time, it's enough. It's enough. Before ruling that targeted questions about communications with Miller 40 were fair if tied to field directives and use of force. For example, questions about communications with Mr. Miller may be perfectly within bounds if they talked about, this is how I want this operation to go, Ellis said. I mean, duh, you know that Stephen Miller's, this is my opinion. He's calling up Bavino and he's saying, this is how I want things to go in Chicago. How many blacks did you get today? And browns? You know, he's getting the daily reports. This is how my mind works. This is my belief. Gregory Bavino has faced claims that agents under his command use chemical agents in neighborhoods and against reporters, triggering court limits on force, mandatory body cams, and conspicuous ID. The judge last week had to treat him like a misbehaving child on punishment. Ellis last week ordered Bavino to make daily court check-ins. This is like, I have to check my daughter's homework because you're failing right now in this subject and we need to get you back on track. I mean, this is embarrassing. It's embarrassing. Paused upon appeal, they were, sweeping disclosures of use of force reports, footage as allegations mounted around Halloween week deployment. The judge also commanded Bavino to wear a body cam after he admitted he didn't even know how to use it, and ensure agents display visible identifiers. They're not going to cooperate. Jackson, this is a circus, and not the Cirque du Soleil kind, okay? This is like, you know, if you're into this kind of cruelty and nonsense, this is more like, I used to take my daughter to this Universal circus here in Atlanta. The little guy was my friend and he would give us great seats in the front row. But I mean, this was a different kind of circus, you understand? Be prepared to be entertained. This is entertaining if you like cruelty. How much longer can this go? And are you sick of the judges who, look, in this case, they got after him, right? Judge Ellis did. But by ordering things that they're not going to do as they're told and nothing's going to happen, it gets me frustrated. Do you agree?
Yeah, well, on the one hand, I think, corruption is always an answer to why the powerful don't face any real repercussions. But also, I think people in these positions never really anticipated that they would have to do something about an administration that just flat out doesn't listen to them. At least in my lifetime, this is completely unprecedented. This doesn't happen. Kind of like when a dog finally catches a car, now what? I never thought I'd really get here, which just goes to show the poor levels of leadership. But also, I think this can last as long as Trump's presidency continues. And I think they all know that. While the Supreme Court may have allowed Trump to do whatever he wants as a presidential act, we'll see how far that actually goes in time. But people like Stephen Miller are not protected from that court order. So he's definitely facing a lot of issues after the Trump administration is done. Which is why they're doing everything they can to rig elections, and we'll see what happens in 28. But yeah, I think that this mess is going to continue as long as Trump's in office, because as you pointed out, who's going to do something about it at the end of the day?
Yeah, hate to quote the Atlanta housewife again, but who gonna check me, boo? I mean, he's building a whole ballroom. Do you really think he's leaving?